After striking a deal with TriStar Pictures in the fall of 1992 that granted the studio the rights to produce an American Godzilla movie with a worldwide release slated for the fall of '94, Toho considered bringing the Versus series of Godzilla movies to an end with its follow-up to Godzilla vs. Mothra. However, as the Sony-backed Hollywood production faced delays while in search of a director, the folks at Toho decided they could put out at least one more installment in their series after Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. While the previous entries post-Biollante focused on renewing the popular monsters of the past, Godzilla 6 quickly landed on having the King of the Monsters fight a new opponent, a mirror image of himself birthed by the Void. Hey Kaiju fans, I'm Taichanalante, and today we're looking at the Bioquartz monster from the darkness, SpaceGodzilla. Godzilla's penultimate foe in the Heisei series, and the only alien creature introduced therein, SpaceGodzilla is a clone of the King of the Monsters spawned by G-cells cast into outer space in the aftermath of his battles with either Biollante or Mothra, which were swallowed by a black hole and exposed to the radiation from a supernova. Boasting an array of gravitational powers and cosmic energy attacks, along with his ability to generate and utilize crystals in various ways, SpaceGodzilla's malice is driven by an instinctive hatred for his progenitor, whose depiction as a morally neutral, neither good nor evil, force of nature he contrasts. Making his way to Earth of his own free will, unlike the typically mind-controlled kaiju pawns of yore, Mothra's Cosmos warned the monster sought to eliminate his Earthling counterpart so the planet would be rendered defenseless against his conquest. With the American Godzilla delayed, Toho Pictures' planning department solicited ideas for the 21st Godzilla movie, ultimately receiving submissions from 25 different people. From among the few pitches that have been mentioned publicly, Godzilla vs. Cthulhu certainly stands out, and previously considered concepts such as Mecha Mothra and a Heisei King Kong were also suggested. Chief among these stories was one involving Emperor Ghidorah, aka Kaiser Ghidorah, a distinct individual from the lower-ranked King Ghidorah in 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, closer in origin to the Showa incarnation. While this new Ghidorah got rejected, reportedly because the kaiju would be too similar to Yamata no Orochi from Toho's upcoming tokusatsu fantasy feature Orochi the Eight-Headed Dragon, the concept of an extraterrestrial kaiju gained a foothold. Before the new year had even arrived, assistant producer Shinichiro Arimasa and producer Shogo Tomiyama had put together a proposal which introduced the concept of Godzilla's enemy being an alien clone of him begat by G-cells cast into outer space. Even the name SpaceGodzilla was on paper by this point. This version of the story featured an army of giant alien dragonflies controlled by SpaceGodzilla, who had ice-based powers and was described as being purely white in color and possessing huge wings. Shinji Nishikawa made several sketches of a traditional-looking SpaceGodzilla sporting enormous wing-shaped dorsal fins, with a four-armed version done by Studio OX and a couple of Ultra Kaiju-looking designs pitched in by Yoshiyuki Kasuya. At this stage, SpaceGodzilla also had the ability to telepathically control other life forms, and would use this power to take control of Miki Saegusa and Little Godzilla. Shinichiro Kobayashi, writer of Godzilla vs. Biollante's original story, submitted a draft titled Godzilla vs. Neo-Godzilla, which built on this concept, but tweaked the origin of Godzilla's alien clone, here called Crystal Godzilla, adding living minerals into the equation and giving him a stretchable, crystalline body. Kobayashi supplied concept art as well, endowing the monster with prominent, prismatic shoulders which could morph into massive wings or grow to encase the entire body for spaceflight. Meanwhile, artist Haruhiko Mae asked, if the theory that Mothra was the source for the G-cells that gave rise to this new space monster was correct, wouldn't the cells of Godzilla's other opponents have also ended up in the mix? Thus, he drew a full set of 7 forms for the extraterrestrial beast, taking on the shape of not just Godzilla, but Biollante Plant Beast and Flower Beast, King Ghidorah, and the larval Mothra and Batra, plus a spindly, skull-faced form somewhat reminiscent of a xenomorph. It's common knowledge by now that SpaceGodzilla's decided design was derived from SuperGodzilla, the transformation of Godzilla featured in the Super Nintendo game of the same name. Minoru Yoshida designed both, originally creating SuperGodzilla for the game, later retooling the look for SpaceGodzilla. Shinichi Wakasa created a clay model based on the design. Shigeaki Ito of Wakasa's company Monsters sculpted the prototype for the costume. The head and neck were initially more distinct from Godzilla's, but after special effects director Koichi Kawakita told him the face is still Godzilla's after all, Ito brought those elements closer in line with Godzilla's form. Staff from both Monsters and Replica played roles in the creation of the suit. Wakasa recalled in his 2017 book, King of Monster Maker, that the suit was originally going to be painted green, so the ventral side was done in yellow latex to match. In the end, a dark blue and reddish-purple color scheme was used. The 3-meter-long tail was all one piece, and the shoulder crystals were removable. The detail of the exposed viscera in Space G's abdomen was added during the sculpting stage. It's not really there on the final concept art or clay maquette. Donning the suit was actor Ryo Hariya, who would go on to play Destoroyah's perfect form in the following film. At 60 or 70 kilograms, it was significantly lighter than the Godzilla suit, despite being larger overall. Additionally, a motorized 1-meter-long model of SpaceGodzilla's flying mode was created by Replica, lined with over 60 crystals. Speaking of, several dozens of crystal towers of varying sizes were made, predominantly of fiber-reinforced plastic, and each lit up internally. For flying close-ups, the suit was simply put in front of a bunch of them. Turning our attention to the look of Space G himself, a couple of details lend credence to the hypothesized relation with Biollante, namely the similar midsections, the tusks erupting from the corners of the mouth, and the shape of the neck. That said, the alien obviously looks more like his namesake, notably retaining external ears, the bridge of the nose, and an orange eye color. Sporting the same skin texture, he similarly got fan-shaped crystal clusters running down his back that taper into granules on the tail, which, divergently, is tipped with a thagomizer-like arrangement of crystals. SpaceGodzilla was born from Godzilla cells which ended up in, you guessed it, outer space. As for the how, 2 hypotheses are presented within Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla. They originate either from cells which escaped orbit when Biollante disintegrated and subsequently scattered into the atmosphere in 1989, or from Mothra having inadvertently carried G-cells into outer space following her battle with Godzilla in 1993, when she flew out there to intercept a meteor that was hurtling towards Earth. In any case, these G-cells were swallowed by a black hole, rapidly evolved under extreme gravity during the process of being released from a white hole, assimilated extraterrestrial biocrystalline organisms known as bioquartz, and were, on top of all that, irradiated by cosmic rays from a supernova. The resulting life form took on many of the physical characteristics of Godzilla, with the additional ability to control 2 types of particles associated with the aforementioned crystalline organisms, gravitons and photons. The bioquartz monster then set a course for Earth, intent on destroying Godzilla and conquering the planet for himself. SpaceGodzilla was first spotted flying by Saturn, where he destroyed a manned NASA satellite prior to clashing with Moguera in the asteroid belt. Defeating the mecha easily, he soon landed on Birth Island and attacked Little Godzilla. When Godzilla arrived, the space monster quickly overpowered him through use of his Corona Beam, and confined Little Godzilla within a crystal cage, abruptly abandoning the battle thereafter. SpaceGodzilla ventured southwest across Japan, incidentally killing the film's main human villain Dr. Susumu Okubo, and eventually landing in Fukuoka. He surrounded the city with crystals, creating a battle area centered around its giant tower, which would serve as a cosmic antenna to supply him with power. Moguera arrived at the city to battle SpaceGodzilla again, but was no match for the monster. Before long, Godzilla arrived as well and joined forces with the robot, which soon split into Starfalcon and Land Mogira. The latter unit drilled underground and knocked out the foundations of SpaceGodzilla's power source, the Fukuoka Tower, while Godzilla toppled the tower from ground level. The tides of battle turned, Mogira recombined and used its spiral grenades to destroy SpaceGodzilla's shoulder crystals in quick succession. In retaliation, SpaceGodzilla impaled and hurled the mecha into a nearby building. Akira Yuki tried to pilot the damaged mech back into battle, colliding with SpaceGodzilla and knocking the celestial clone down, but the damage to the machine made it almost impossible to control, and it crashed into several buildings where it became completely disabled. SpaceGodzilla now faced his counterpart hobbled and alone, soon knocked down once more by a shot of atomic breath. Able to tap into the bountiful cosmic energy in the air following the destruction of the space monster's shoulder crystals, Godzilla unleashed 4 blasts of his burn spiral heat ray. Proving too much for him to cope with, SpaceGodzilla exploded, and his crystallized remains flew back up into space. The crystals on SpaceGodzilla's shoulders serve as conduits to absorb and amplify the earthbound cosmic energy which powers him. In particular, the energy generators contained within do as their name suggests, utilizing cosmic energy funneled to them by the crystal shards sticking out of the shoulders, which function as antennae. Meanwhile, numerous crystals embedded within his long tail store this energy. In order to counteract the rapid energy depletion he experiences on Earth, he used Fukuoka Tower as a gigantic antenna and spawned numerous building-sized crystal towers within the city to aid in channeling and serve as energy reserves, creating an energy field or battle area that constantly replenished his energy while within its bounds, bestowing him with limitless power. SpaceGodzilla is said to generate special pulses which he can synchronize with brainwaves emitted from the core crystal in his body, essentially his equivalent of a central nervous system and brain, giving him command of gravitons and photons in apparent transcendence of the laws of physics. Telekinesis, in other words. Owed to this is the unrivaled control he exerts over the trajectory of his corona beam, a yellow-orange energy beam resembling a lightning bolt fired from his mouth. He can freely trace any path for it, allowing it to curve sharply and hit targets from all angles, thus bypassing potential defenses. The beam is able to visibly injure Godzilla, even knocking him to the ground in 2 instances, and later is used to sever one of Mogira's arms. SpaceGodzilla can further weaponize gravitons in the form of supergravitational waves or anti-gravity waves known as gravity tornadoes. By converging graviton particles onto a target, he can lift them into the air, rendering them helpless. He was able to effortlessly do so with the 60,000 metric ton Godzilla. Furthermore, SpaceGodzilla can direct circular waves of electromagnetic radiation called photon hurricanes at opponents. These interfered with Mogira's systems during their first encounter, rendering it inoperable when used in combination with his corona beam. The installation of the new magnetic and electronic countermeasure on the repaired mech was necessary to neutralize the waves. Using his telekinetic and geokinetic powers in tandem, SpaceGodzilla can raise multiple huge crystals out of the ground, then have them fly through the air towards opponents, or have them rain down from the sky. Though perhaps not the fastest projectiles, they can home in on targets, as their name suggests, making them difficult to dodge. Space G can use his crystals to trap other monsters, of course demonstrated with the trapping of Little in the movie. This is often demonstrated in comics too, sometimes generating the crystals out of thin air, or even the near vacuum by the moon. One noteworthy incident from Godzilla Rulers of Earth involves him transforming while Gigan's right in his face, forcing Gigan to cut off his own arm to escape. Moreover, the Space Beast uses crystals as melee weapons in the game Godzilla Save the Earth. In the GVSG manga, he uses one to parry and deflect Godzilla's atomic breath, later impaling the Big G in the leg with one, and making it gruesomely expand while embedded. In both Godzilla Unleashed and Save the Earth, he can summon crystal towers that act as turrets, firing off energy at enemies. SpaceGodzilla can summon a powerful electromagnetic barrier called the Photon Reactive Shield at will to protect himself against incoming energy attacks, including Godzilla's atomic breath. SpaceGodzilla can switch between his flying and combat modes at will by unfurling his variable dorsal crystals. By covering his entire body with crystalline cells and manipulating a large amount of gravitons, the monster can accelerate repeatedly in space to achieve speeds near the speed of light. During high-speed travel, electromagnetic waves generated from the crystalline regions are said to form a vortex-like barrier around his body, shattering obstacles and therefore protecting him from relativistic collisions. In Earth's atmosphere, SpaceGodzilla is capable of reaching speeds of up to Mach 3. He can levitate at low altitude in his combat mode as well, and lift himself to a standing position after being knocked onto the ground. An anti-gravity phenomenon that occurs during flight can be observed in the form of red lightning bolt-like rays, which destroy objects on the ground. Also demonstrated while flying over Sapporo is a bizarre ability to make claw and slot machines dispense their prizes all at once. SpaceGodzilla demonstrates a remarkable degree of intelligence and strategy compared to other kaiju. Upon his arrival to Earth, he attacked Little Godzilla in order to draw out Godzilla himself, then searched for a suitable location to set up an arena that would supply him with limitless cosmic energy. He settled on Fukuoka, its 234-meter-tall tower perfect for him to use as an antenna. Seemingly aware that he was at a disadvantage in close combat, SpaceGodzilla used his telekinesis and corona beams to keep both the Big G and Mogera at a distance, and shifted his attention to the latter when he realized there was a bigger threat. Space G also placed an energy shield around the Fukuoka tower after Godzilla had begun trying to destroy it. His intelligence is aided by the use of his crown-like space horn, a sensory crystal on his forehead which functions as a radar. SpaceGodzilla's fangs are capable of piercing Godzilla's skin, and he can infuse his strikes with energy in an attack dubbed the Space Claw. His most effective physical attack came in the form of his Tail Smasher, in which he concentrated energy at the tip of his crystal-encrusted Thagomizer-like tail and impaled Mogera through the chest with it, subsequently hurling the 160,000 metric ton robot several hundred meters through the air. SpaceGodzilla is incredibly resilient, as is to be expected from a clone of the king. The regenerative abilities of his cells are stated to be remarkable, such that if even a small amount remains, they will regenerate. Most of what Godzilla and Mogera threw at him, from atomic heat rays to the all-weapon, didn't faze him much. SpaceGodzilla doesn't seem to be very suited for close-quarters brawling in his debut film. His bulky build and short arms make him ill-equipped for fighting opponents mano a mano. Also, his energy depletes quickly on Earth, requiring him to set up a battle area covered in crystal conduits to constantly replenish it. His physical defenses were pierced by the anti-Godzilla superweapon Mogera. The robot's crusher drill drew blood from his neck, and its spiral grenade missiles, designed specifically to target Godzilla's second brain, were able to destroy his shoulder crystals. Once both were blown off, the monster's combat ability became halved, and he could not channel energy as effectively nor regulate his own well enough. Evidently, he couldn't regenerate his shoulder crystals, at least not instantly, -1 style, and so his body exploded after being overloaded with energy from Godzilla's burned spiral heat ray. SpaceGodzilla's name is trademarked as one word joined together, just like Mechagodzilla. However, unlike Mecha G, the G in SpaceGodzilla is capitalized, whereas the G in Mechagodzilla is not capitalized. While the two-word Space blank Godzilla is used within Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla itself, and plenty of official Japanese media to this day, the camel-cased spelling is more prevalent in English media. Still, there are exceptions here and there, including as recently as Godzilla Battle Line, and the 2024 English translation of Shinji Nishikawa's Godzilla the Encyclopedia. Some things aren't even consistent with themselves, like Godzilla Save the Earth, which uses the two-word spelling within the game, but the camel case spelling in the manual, and Welbeck's 2022 Godzilla, the official guide to the King of the Monsters, which uses the uppercase G in the main text, but a lowercase g just for the photo captions. How strange is that? But I digress. Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla is not the first time Toho had the idea to give a member of Godzilla's species extraterrestrial origins. Enter a SpaceGodzilla. Originally a proposal for a full-fledged film, one of many considered to restart the Godzilla franchise through its unplanned hiatus in the late 1970s, A SpaceGodzilla was ultimately published as a two-part story with Toho's approval in the February and April 1979 issues of the Japanese edition of Starlog magazine. It begins with the second-generation Godzilla dying of diabetes while carrying her son, Lilin. Humanity discovers she's a female member of an alien race known as the SpaceGodzillas, and her true name is Roseanne. They convert her body into a spaceship, allowing her to carry Lilin to planet Godzilla, where the little one fights alongside his father Kunin against the evil Sunarian aliens and their leader Gamoni. You know, just your typical Godzilla story. On April 2nd, 2020, Wizards of the Coast announced their upcoming Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths set would feature characters from the Godzilla franchise. All were special versions of regular cards, whose names were printed beneath each kaiju's. The set's arrival onto shelves in the following weeks would have gone off without a hitch, were it not for one particular card, SpaceGodzilla's, which was subtitled Corona Beam of Death in Japanese, and Death Corona in English. Needless to say, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the card was rechristened with the subtitle Void Invader. However, it was too late to change this for the initial printing, so some made it into consumer hands. As established earlier, SpaceGodzilla's design recycled that of SuperGodzilla's from the 1993 video game. But 30 years later, this would be inverted in a way. See, when Bandai announced in August 2024 that they'd be releasing a movie monster series soft vinyl figure of SuperGodzilla from the game, they were upfront on it being a retool of their SpaceGodzilla figure. Indeed, not only are Space G's dorsal crystals retained, and thus inaccurate to SuperGodzilla's sprite art, but still engraved to the bottom of his foot is the katakana for SpaceGodzilla. SpaceGodzilla starred in Godzilla Island's very first story arc, introducing Torema, only to be killed by Godzilla and Torema after a one-episode fight. Nonetheless, writer Takahiko Masuda found ways to bring the Crystal King back twice. In SpaceGodzilla's spirit, Dogora raises his ghost to possess Godzilla and drain the other Earth monsters' auras one by one. King Caesar performs an exorcism with a giant Ofuda, but is too late to stop SpaceGodzilla from regaining his physical form. He's stronger this time, but not by much. In the story arc, SpaceGodzilla's spirit again, G-Guard is convinced the spectral kaiju has returned when Gorosaurus turns up comatose and King Caesar's shrine burns down, but he turns out to merely be a hologram set up by the Zillion Randeth. Then it turns out that a monster sporting the amazing name Super Special SpaceGodzilla High Grade Type 2 is also on the island, having been summoned by the giant Dark Emperor. Silly Emperor, that's not a high-grade figure. This SpaceGodzilla thrashes Godzilla until he's spooked by a giant hologram, courtesy of Firefighter Jet Jaguar. After Godzilla breaks off one of his shoulder crystals, he floats away, and the villains bicker over whose fault it is. SpaceGodzilla, or rather SpaceGodzilla-kun, took a while to show up in Godziban, but when he did, he brought his brothers, Space Manila and Space Little. Landing on Godzi Island, they terrorize Gabara, Gigan, and Anguirus until King Goji-kun throws SpaceGodzilla-kun, and he's embarrassed further by Space Manila and Space Little getting along just fine with their terrestrial counterparts. They show up at the end of the most recent episode to help the Godzilla family against a terrifying monster army, along with most of the rest of the cast. SpaceGodzilla has featured in over a dozen video games as of 2025, not counting collaborations, with its most notable appearances being as a primary antagonist in the Atari Pipeworks games Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed. In the former, he's under the control of the Vortak, and is the final opponent in Godzilla 2000's action mode on hard difficulty, where upon defeating him, a true ending cutscene plays showing him getting sucked in by a black hole. For the sequel, he was no longer under Vortak control, instead leading the Mutants faction. The force behind the global crystal plague, which the game centers around, his meteor shower birthed two brand new monsters, the crystalline creature Crystalac and the volcanic beast Obsidius. In Godzilla Battleline, SpaceGodzilla is a 6-cost 4-star that summons a pair of crystals every 7 seconds. These lose health over time, and boost the attack power of allied units by 25% for 5 seconds when nearby, with the added function of drawing enemies' ire and thus slowing them down. His leader ability, Photon Field, places 6 crystals with the same effect at random spots across the battlefield. Early in 2024, a Fukuoka version of the unit was added to the game, which summons 2 homing ghosts every 8 seconds that fly towards enemies, stalling their advance and dealing damage on contact if not destroyed quickly enough. His Corona Beam attack can hit up to 3 enemies in close proximity, making it decently effective at dealing with groups. Before moving on, a shout out to Horiuchi Hisahiko and Nagashima Hiroyuki, who worked on the soundtrack for Godzilla Generations Maximum Impact. In particular, SpaceGodzilla's theme, which is used during the intro section of this Kaiju profile Redux, as well as the original version from 2017. There's been a lot of updates between then and now, but we can't fix what's already perfect. Naturally, the manga adaptation of Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla was the first to feature the space monster. Here, SpaceGodzilla spreads his crystals by exhaling a stream of crystalline spores, their proliferation far more severe than in the movie. His geokinesis is showcased pretty gruesomely when, after having stuck Godzilla in the leg with a huge crystal, he makes it violently sprout additional shards. With the Monster King seemingly incapacitated, he lets his guard down, only to get impaled by Godzilla using the very crystal he'd been infested with, knocking down Fukuoka Tower in the process. He gets back up and emits a full-body beam at Godzilla, but thankfully, Mogera was close enough to use as a shield. The Big G subsequently fired off a powered-up heat ray, which partially melted Space G, then pulled the barbed crystal from his body and rammed it into his cosmic clone, shattering him into pieces. In the Digest manga illustrated by Shinji Nishikawa, Godzilla is the one to destroy his shoulder crystals, subsequently overloading him with energy from his heat rays till he went boom. SpaceGodzilla also takes plenty of L's throughout IDW's Godzilla comics. He appears in all 3 of the books that comprise the IDW universe, while Kingdom of Monsters just teases him at the end of the final issue. In Godzilla, he comes to Earth with Monster X, Gigan, and Hedorah, devastating London. After fighting off Batra and Titanosaurus, he joins up with Monster X in New York City to take on Godzilla. The battle goes well until Kiryu, who Monster X previously knocked underwater, blasts him with the Absolute Zero cannon, and Godzilla follows that up by shattering his crystals. He retreats into space, where he's no less pleasant, picking a fight with a Cryog ship stationed near the moon in Rulers of Earth. After he easily dismantles multiple Mechagodzilla units, the aliens send out the upgraded Gigan, who manages to drive him off after a vicious fight. The Cryogs soon get their revenge, sending SpaceGodzilla crashing down to Los Angeles during the Trilopod incursion. He teams up with Godzilla for exactly long enough to destroy the Trilopods based on himself and Megaguirus, then turns on him, but flees when he sees the approaching Trilopod hive in the sky. SpaceGodzilla stars in 2 other issues of IDW's first wave, Godzilla the Half-Century War No. 4, and Godzilla in Hell No. 3. He attacks Bombay in the former, with Godzilla and Mechagodzilla foiling him, and destroys the entire planet beam-locking with Godzilla in Rio de Janeiro in the latter. They soon cross paths again in Hell, where Godzilla's temporary angelic powers lead to the Crystal King's obliteration. IDW's second wave brought SpaceGodzilla his own double-length one-shot, Godzilla Rivals vs. SpaceGodzilla. Alien miners accidentally disturb his slumber inside an asteroid, angering him into attacking their homeworld. As he tears through the military and their pet kaiju Singura, he exposes the fault lines in their heavily stratified society, and eventually their planet's actual fault lines. In the process, he discovers a baby kaiju, who writer-artist Matt Frank has hinted as being related to Crystalac, and immediately crushes it. He also features in the final issue of Rivals, King Ghidorah vs. SpaceGodzilla, Godzilla vs. the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2, where Psycho Blue steals his powers to become Psycho Ranger SpaceGodzilla, and Godzilla, Here There Be Aliens, where he's part of the Zillion invasion force. His next gig will be in Starship Godzilla, per Tim Seeley. Speaking of upcoming Godzilla media, we couldn't end this video without talking about Godzilla Kong Supernova, the next film in the MonsterVerse, and quite possibly SpaceGodzilla's Hollywood debut. Not only is the title itself a potential allusion to his origin, but actor Matthew Modine made numerous references to Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla on Instagram after he was cast in the film, including a hashtag in a post he later removed. Now, SpaceGodzilla is certainly a bold choice for a villain, considering his only film barely had theatrical play outside of Japan. And while some actors are cavalier about spoilers, Modine has been on Stranger Things long enough to know better. He could just really like Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla, or engaging in cruel misdirection. We'll find out whenever the Playmates toys leak. But for now, that's all we have on SpaceGodzilla. Thank you for watching.